I think, Sarah, if you are able to record it, that would be awesome. Just so that I can share it with you guys all when we're finished, so we all are able to share it with anybody that we need to. Okay, without further ado, let's get going. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. I'd love to begin with a land acknowledgement. So I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining from Amiskwaciwâskahikan. So this is colonially known as Edmonton, and it's on Treaty 6 territory. This is the traditional lands of many diverse groups, including the Cree, the Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and the Nakota Sioux. Today's meeting is representative of World Environment Day that happened yesterday. So this is where we focus on the protection of our lands and awareness of different environmental issues. Acknowledging our traditional Indigenous lands is an important first step, not just today, but I think every day, so that we can help improve our relationships with the environment and the groups of Indigenous people who have been the protectors of those lands throughout history. Our youths have developed this paper with perspectives from across Turtle Island. So we're joining on a virtual platform. So I invite everybody participating today to focus on your own connection to your traditional land that you're joining from, as we explore the themes and the actions that are presented in this paper. And when I say across Turtle Island, I mean that. So if you take a look at the schools that helped develop this paper, we've got schools from coast to coast to coast, representing all of Canada. So although not all of our schools were able to join us today to help run the presentation, just do know that we did get ideas from all of them. So it is very representative of our very large and diverse country. I'd like to do a little bit of information just about what CGE is and what the program is to get you guys an idea of kind of where this paper is coming from. So the Center for Global Education is a school-based education nonprofit that develops and delivers virtual projects to engage and empower youth from across the planet as global citizens through connecting them to the people, places, and issues that they're learning about in their classrooms. Through the power of critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration, CGE empowers youth to work towards solutions to some of the world's greatest challenges. And our Waves of Change program is a national project that engages youth through educational opportunities in every province and territory in both urban and rural communities. It blends physical events, digital engagement, and a climate action tracking tool, coming soon, to further climate action across Canada. The project provides learning opportunities to Canadian K-12 youth to make clear connections between climate change, ocean health, and daily actions that can reduce greenhouse gases to inspire their peers and broader communities to take climate action. So CGE is very proud to run our Decarbonize program as a subsection of the Waves of Change project. And we really look forward to continuing to help engage youth in their climate journeys for the remainder of Waves of Change and into the future. CGE would also like to extend an enormous thank you and congratulations to the hundreds of hours of work that have been put in by students across the country. So thank you very much to my youth who are presenting today. Now, before we get to the presentation, I would love to get a quick good morning from everybody and a welcome. So I'm going to begin by saying hello and good morning to my colleague with the Center for Global Education, Terry Godwald.
Good morning, Rebecca. Good morning, young people, and good morning, guests. As Rebecca said, my name is Terry Godwald, and I am the Executive Director of the Center for Global Education, and I am super excited to hear from all the young people about the work they have done. And so great to see the partners in Decarbonize who are here as well from Green Learning and from Oceanwise and Taking It Global.
Wonderful, thank you. Good morning as well to our special guest from the Senate of Canada. Good morning, good afternoon, Senator Mary Coyle.
Good afternoon. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you. I'm with you here in Mi'kma'ki, which is the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I will just say "Kwe," which is how the Mi'kmaq say hello. So I'm happy to be actually in hybrid format. And right after this, I will be in my Aboriginal Peoples Committee meeting.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thank you so much. Good morning as well to the Executive Vice President of Conservation for Oceanwise, Dr. Carlos Drews.
A very good morning to everybody. I am working, playing, and living here in the unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I add to that it's not just the land, it's also the coastal waters. And the coastal waters are of particular interest to me, of course, working at Oceanwise. And I very much look forward to hear from the youth what they have to say today.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Welcome as well to the Executive Director at Green Learning, Kathy Warbeck.
Hello, everyone. And I am joining from Amiskwitchi, Wisconsin as well in Treaty 6, also referred to as Edmonton. And yes, I'm new to the executive director role of Green Learning Canada, but I have worked with the organization in the past. And in my other role where I came from was the Alberta Council for Environmental Education, and I had worked with the Center for Global Education and Youth in that role. And so I'm very excited to be here and to be part of this partnership with Oceanwise, Center for Global Education, and taking it global. So really looking forward to hearing from the youth. Can't wait.
Awesome. We're also very excited to have you. It's so nice to have you on the Oceanwise team, and I'm really looking forward to hopefully lots of more great meetings like this to come. And finally, I would like to welcome the Director of Climate Change Adaptation and Resilience for ECCC, Lanielle Bateman.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here as well. So my name is Lanielle Bateman, and I'm the Director of Climate Change Adaptation Policy. I work at the Government of Canada and Environment and Climate Change Canada, and I'm joining you today from Ottawa, so the traditional and unceded lands of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And as I was just getting ready to see if I could find my mute button to make sure I was unmuted, I realized the whole time I was unmuted. So I apologize in advance if you were listening to me eat my lunch as we were getting started. Thanks.
No, it's wonderful. If anybody forgets to unmute, don't worry, we are on it. Like 90% of my job is muting people when they're accidentally making background noises. So you guys are plenty good. Thank you very much. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for those introductions. You will have time after our presentation to share your ideas and questions with the youth, as well for our youth participating. Just remember, if you guys have questions for any of these guests that have joined us, you can type them in the chat to me. You can raise your hand, you can type it directly to them. This is a really great opportunity for us to ask questions and share ideas back and forth. So just for everybody to kind of keep that in mind. Well, without further ado, I would love to pass it over to our first youth presenter. So Oceane, you can take it away with our presentation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Oceane Fontaine, and I'm from Austin O'Brien High School in grade 12 in Amiskwitchi, Wisconsin in Alberta. So decarbonize, decolonize is extremely important to me and to the other youth that participate because it provides a platform for youth voices in regards to climate and social change, which we don't often have. It helps youth develop crucial interpersonal skills by having us discuss with others who come from different backgrounds than us, different countries. It gives youth an opportunity to meet and discuss with other youth from all around the world, as I mentioned before. So it really helps us broaden our perspectives, not only of what other youth can do, but also of what climate and social justice means. It provides youth a global community of like-minded individuals, which really helps and encourage us to try and make change. And it gives us so much more. So one way that Decarbonize, Decolonize connects youth from all around the world is via virtual meetings, such as the bilaterals, which are meetings between the global north and south. This year, my school, Austin O'Brien, it was our first year to participate. We were paired up with a school in Peru, and we were able to discuss with that class the similarities and differences we faced in regards to climate change. Through this program, we are encouraged to create climate and social change in our communities by sometimes demanding greener curriculums for our schools, such as Taylor. You'll soon hear from her. She's from Lacombe in Alberta. And they actually have like a beekeeping program and a goat keeping program and also a greenhouse. So these green curriculums not only brings more awareness to the climate problem, but also gives us ways to perhaps pursue greener jobs in the future. Also, we can search for greener energy alternatives, such as solar panels. Some schools, such as mine, start composting programs, community gardens, and we can also act for legal change. So all this culminates to representation at COP26. COP26 is the United Nations Summit for the Environment. Students from each continent were chosen to represent the decarbonized, decolonized youth of the world. This year, I had the honor of being able to represent North America at COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. And really, we had to present the Global Youth Manifesto, which you will hear about later in this presentation. But our job also included a meeting with global leaders and stakeholders. We had to present the Global Youth Manifesto. We went to marches with Greta Thunberg and other youths. We did presentations at schools in Glasgow and surrounding areas to bring awareness of what we were doing with Decarbonize, Decolonize. And it also gives us a lot of educational opportunities considering the system and how it works and how we can bring climate change at a more political level. So the youth paper development. We have two papers. One is the Global Youth Manifesto that we wrote as a global community. And we also have the Canadian Youth Manifesto that was written with our Canadian community. So it is based off of Environment and Climate Change Canada's departmental plan for 2021-2022. And to develop the manifesto, students had to share their thoughts on the ECCC documents and were collected throughout February from all waves of change schools. And then volunteers gathered in Lacombe, Alberta in March to combine these ideas into our 11 demands and what became the youth paper.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ocean, for explaining the process that goes into this. That was wonderful. I would love now to dive into the paper. I will pass it over to our presenter, Oliver, who will kind of let you know what some of the demands from that paper were.
So hi everyone, my name is Oliver Baker. I'm a 17-year-old grade 11 student from Kemptville, Nova Scotia, and I go to Northeast Kings Education Center out in the middle of a cornfield in Canning, Nova Scotia. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is the 4 different core responsibility sections in the ECCC departmental plan. So the first one being taking action on clean growth and climate change, preventing and managing pollution, conserving nature, and predicting weather and environmental conditions. To start us off with the first one, description of what they kind of talked about in the department plan for the first section was they were looking at to reduce emissions. They want to transfer over to clean transportation and also give aid to some businesses to combat the climate problem. And so as youth, they're demanding that the government needs to increase and promote diverse and inclusive conversations around climate change throughout different conversations within schools and their communities, as well as an immediate transition to clean energy sources that considers and addresses displacement of people from previous incomes. Lastly, the government needs to take action to reduce the consumption, production, and disposal of plastics. The single-use plastics ban here in Nova Scotia, we have no more plastic bags or cutlery or straws. However, more needs to be done about that. I did a science project 2 years ago that went to the Canada-wide science fair, and I looked at to see if there were microplastics entering blue mussels. What I found is that there are microplastics being found in our fishes, but it's also increasing after 2 months. 2 months, there was an increase of microplastics. It's not enough to cause us harm yet. However, microplastics are essentially the smaller pieces of plastics that have broken down from bigger pieces. So if it's been in the water for a large amount of time, then it's just keeping accumulating, and more action needs to be due to prevent more plastic from ending up in the water. Over to the next slide. The next section looked at preventing and managing pollution. The government wants to implement environmental standards, reduce contaminants in the air, the water, and the soil, and also promote environmental regulations that they are hoping to withhold. And so the youth response to this and the demands are going to be the government needs to create clear and concise frameworks for garbage cleanups and plans to preserve our environment. Additionally, more ocean waste management needs to become a priority in creating a greener future. And lastly, government increases regulation on deforestation and energy practices that affect our air quality. The ocean waste is the most important, and essentially we need to do the work that the ocean cleanup has started essentially and implement that into Canada right now so that we're able to prevent the crisis from becoming even more significant. And so, in the conserving nature, essentially the government wants to protect species at risk, in particular different bird species, increase protected areas for these species at risk, and advance the conservation of biodiversity. Not a whole lot to prevent climate change, but these are still very important to look at the different biodiversity and creatures that we have in Canada. So the youth response to this, looking at the government needs to prioritize the protection of ecosystems through the restoration, reestablishment, and promotion of protected environmental spaces. Additionally, looking at a greener education or curriculum, the government were to work with environmental stakeholders to develop and integrate a greener education, as well as educational skill development internship programs for people of all ages and backgrounds. Essentially, what this program is doing is teaching us youth more about the problems that are affecting us in the community, but also sharing that with other youth in the community as well, different schools that we've gone to and presented to. And lastly, the government needs to invest in greener infrastructure to promote sustainability in our communities. Now, the last section is the one that I've been working with the most this past year, looking at predicting weather and environmental conditions. What essentially the government report, the departmental plan, was looking at monitoring weather to provide warnings well in advance, as well as conducting more research about predicting weather and to develop a computer model to predict weather conditions that could become very significant. And so the demands of this, there needs to be an increase in government investment in new technologies in order to monitor our weather changes and patterns more closely and accurately. And lastly, a concrete plan is implemented to protect vulnerable populations experiencing extreme weather events. The science project that I did this year also went to the Canada-wide Science Fair. I received a silver medal for that. And I looked at to see if there was marine water entering through the agricultural dikes that we have in Nova Scotia. There's an abattoir built into them. It's essentially a gate that the Acadians built way back in the 1600s to allow marine water to not enter pretty much. It can't flood the agricultural lands at high tide, but the freshwater streams can still exit at low tide. And so what I was looking at is to see if the abattoir were functioning properly. And I found that there was marine water entering. So all these different agricultural fields that the dikes are protecting are at risk. And so this could cause harm to all the crops that are being grown, significant economic damages that would be affected, but also the fish and sea creatures that are swimming in the water as well. I'm currently in the bio class of my school right now, and I learned last year is that if you put a freshwater fish in marine water, or marine water fish that's used to salt water and freshwater, they could explode. So essentially there are risks that are very significant and need to be protected. And so looking at what can be done right now, from my science fair project, a little thing would be an abattoir assessment. Through my research, I found that through a storm surge and high tide, flooding could occur and destroy all these agricultural fields and would take years to recover from because of the salinity in the water. And so an abattoir assessment, if there's a hole built into the dikes and there's water passing through, there needs to be something to protect that. And I found that there was marine water entering, and so an assessment right away could protect millions of dollars in damages. And that concludes my part of the in-depth conversation of our manifesto. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Oliver. It is so interesting and amazing to have a student on the coast that's able to give us that perspective of the connection to the ocean. Because as Carlos was saying in the beginning, yes, we are on those traditional lands, but those traditional waters are just as important and just as big of a piece of the puzzle as everything else. So thank you very much for sharing, Oliver. We're now going to go to our final presenter, Taylor. I will pass it to you to do our final section.
All right, so I am Taylor Perez. I am a grade 12 student at École Lacombe Composite High School located in Lacombe, Alberta, as Ocean mentioned earlier. And I'm going to be talking about the future. So the future is extremely important as it is a significant part of our day-to-day lives and will be because, well, it's the future. So we came up with kind of a guideline with 3 key points that will kind of act as a guide to allow us to create a brighter and more sustainable future for everyone. So the first key point is to inform. We would like to ask you to please share this decarbonized document within your organizations and let others know about this paper, as well as the actions being taken by youth across Canada and the world to better the world that we live in and communicate with each other on climate issues. We should also educate others about the impacts of climate change, as a lot of people understand climate change is there, but they don't care as much because they don't know how greatly it can affect their day-to-day lives. We should also educate others about the things we ourselves can do at home to mitigate climate change and reduce our carbon footprint, as many people want to do at least something, but don't know how. For example, turning off lights when you're not using them. For example, like I have 3 lights on right now. Those are the only lights on in this room because they're the only ones I need. And also, say when you're brushing your teeth, don't leave the water running. Turn it off when you're not using it. plant a garden with flowers because it helps with the pollinator species, stuff like that. So the second point is to inspire. We would like to ask you to provide opportunities for youth voices to be heard in your organizations. Our voices matter, as we will be the ones to inherit this planet. We can advocate for a change in the environment and understand that when we work together, we can make our voices heard, and we must understand that our voices do matter. Look at Greta Thunberg, for example. Oh, the image is very pixelated, my apologies. I forgot to change it. But Greta Thunberg, for example, she is a huge inspiration to many people across the world. She has done so many different climate activism projects, such as protesting and doing a bunch of public speeches, and she's only 18. I think that's absolutely incredible. We should also let others know that's just not our voices that matter, but it's everyone's voices that matter, and everyone plays a part in our future. The third point is to initiate. We'd like to ask you to make real action toward implementing our demands by the end of the year, and not just to brush what we are saying off your shoulders. And for those at home, as well as those of you here in the meeting today, we would like to ask you to initiate larger scale projects in your own communities and work with community members to create a more sustainable environment, no matter where we live. For example, and I'm going to butcher the name of this person, the vertical forest defined by Stefano Borri. So this is part of the more sustainable green infrastructure that was mentioned earlier. So he has built these buildings, these apartment buildings for people to live in, that also incorporate a ton of green design into them, such as, well, forests, which act as carbon capture. And I think that is an absolutely amazing example. Some other examples include protections of park or recreation, protection of local wildlife, regulations and restrictions on hunting and fishing, establishing more solar projects, establishing more greenhouses and green roofs, electric public transportation, reduced food waste, so on and so forth. There's a huge list, and if I were to say it all, it would go on for days. I also want everyone to know that even if you think an idea isn't the best, no idea is a bad idea. And we should all get our ideas out there, because when we work together, we can make something great. And that is everything about the future.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing, Taylor. And thank you to all three of our youth. They've been preparing like crazy for the last few weeks to get this presentation together for you. And you guys all did an absolutely amazing job. So I'd just like to say thank you to you three for this wonderful presentation. I would love now to turn it over to some of our special guests to share their thoughts, ideas, and questions on the paper. So we'll go ahead and use the same order that we did for our introductions. So I will pass it over first to Senator Mary Coyle.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you so much to Ocean and to Oliver, who's just down the road, and to Taylor. Fantastic, very thoughtful presentations. Ocean, giving us that background on that importance of being connected globally. Your partnership with Peru, fantastic. Your participation at COP26. Are you going to COP27 in Egypt? Anyway, very, very, very important background. Thank you for that. Taylor, you, in addition to your own, no, sorry, not Taylor, Oliver, in addition to your own, research on the dikes and the ocean and the freshwater interaction, and the impacts of microplastics on marine organisms. You walked us through the manifesto, which is something that I did get a chance to read before joining you today. And I'm not going to obviously repeat everything that you said, but very good points, and taking the Environment and Climate Change Canada's plan and using that as your base to then say, okay, now what? Where do we think we need to act? That was wonderful to hear each of those areas. And Taylor, my goodness, inform, inspire, and initiate. And I like the way you talked about inform, educating ourselves. We all have to be educated about climate change, but also about not just how bad it is and how bad it's going to be if we don't do something, but inform ourselves on what we can do. I really appreciated that, and that importance of youth voices. And you've all talked about the importance of youth voices. You almost didn't have to talk about it. We can feel it, we can see it, we can appreciate it. But that's something very important, and I'll get to that. And initiate. actions, right? That's what this is all about. So, the last thing we want to be doing with conversations on climate and climate change, which we know is an emergency, absolute emergency in our country, but also all around the world. We don't want to shut down or cause people to, out of fear, just kind of, act like ostriches and put their heads in the sand. We want people to feel empowered and find ways to be parts of the solutions. And I really appreciated how you've, really all come together and focused towards what can be done. I've been asked to, in addition to giving you that little bit of feedback, talk about so I'm a parliamentarian, okay? You have Leniel who's in the government. I'm a parliamentarian. I'm in Canada's upper house. The Senate of Canada basically does three things. We represent, and it's our job to represent you, okay? And I represent Nova Scotia, but I'm also meant to represent any Canadian, or actually anybody, frankly, who is underrepresented. So, give voice to the voiceless, investigate. So look into things, study things, and legislate, of course, make the laws, right? That are setting the future direction for our country. So I'm a co-founder and the co-chair of something called Senators for Climate Solutions. It's almost 1 year old, this group. And what we've done is we've brought together senators from all groups. Every group in the Senate of Canada is part of this, because one of the biggest impediments to climate action has been the politicization of climate action. But climate should not be politicized. This is something that is not a conservative issue. It's not a liberal issue. It's not an NDP issue. It's not solely owned by the Greens. Everybody has to be concerned and everybody has to be part of the solution. So we have a new body called Senators for Climate Solutions. There's 44 of us from every group in the Senate. I also belong to the all-party parliamentary caucus on climate. And what we're trying to do is a number of things. First, just like you, learn together, right? So you have to learn before you can act. So we are learning, and we just had a great conversation with Mark Carney, who's leading the global finance world on climate finance. We had Fatih Birol, the head of the International Energy Agency, speaking with us. We had Canada's chief negotiator to COP speaking with us. So we've had a whole variety of people helping to educate our group. We're focused right now on the results of Stockholm Plus 50, which is the big conference that happened just last week in Stockholm, 50 years after the first environmental conference. So we're sharing that with our members. So that's learning together. Then connecting, just like you talked about connecting internationally, we have been inspired by and are connected to Peers for the Planet, the UK House of Lords Climate and Biodiversity Action Organization. So we're part of, we connect with them, and we're going to be connecting with our American counterparts. We legislate, right? So we are instituting a climate lens that we use to look at all relevant legislation to make sure that it is having the best possible effect it can have on meeting Canada's climate agenda and climate goals. So that's the kinds of things that we can do as senators. One final thing I will mention, we're a new group, we're just a year old. We are looking at starting something called a Citizens Assembly on Climate, which is to bring more Canadian voices out on the issue of climate and to come together on climate, right? So no division, what can we come together on? And that would include youth voices. And finally, we are connecting with the Irish Senate, and the Irish Senate just had their first encounter with youth voices, or they brought in youth from all over Ireland to speak to their Senate Climate and Environment Committee. And that's something they're trying to institute on a regular basis. And we sent one of our emissaries to attend. So we're going to see whether we might be able to institute something similar to that. Anyway, I'll just end by saying congratulations. Well done, lots to do, and happy to work with you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Senator Coyle, for sharing. I do love that you're talking about getting those voices of citizens into the climate discussion, because that was one of the big things that the youth were focused on when they were writing their paper, was getting those voices out there. So that's awesome to hear. Thank you very much for sharing your ideas and your thoughts. We really appreciate it. I'm going to hand it over now to our second guest, Dr. Carlos Drews with Oceanwise.
Thank you for the Youth Manifesto presentation and all these great ideas. And I really believe in the absolute power of youth voices. So I think you are just a great example of how to take this to the next level, which is not just to express opinions, but also to land them on concrete recommendations that government, civil society, and communities can implement. And I think that is really your target audiences. It goes way beyond the regulatory pieces in there, and thank you for that. Very impressed, Ocean, with your suggestions around renewable energies, youth dialogue, chemical contamination, but also your mentioning of plastics. And incidentally, there is a connection between plastics and climate change, of course. Plastics are made of fossil fuels, and they trap fossil fuels as long as they remain as plastic. But when we dispose of plastics, if we don't have a circular economy, then oftentimes plastics get burnt, and then that's how you release, again, greenhouse gases. So that is a problem. At the same time, if you keep the plastic as plastics and they end up in the oceans, then we're doing absolutely no service to ourselves. And plastics are a pervasive, very, very long-lasting contaminant. We know that. It's not just the big pieces, it's also microplastics, and we heard mention of that. So I'm totally impressed with placing plastics also front and center as part of your requests, because this is definitely one that we have to tackle together. And I insist in that the plastics issue is one that needs to be tackled at source. It's with consumer choices, it's with replacing single-use plastic with biodegradable alternatives. The background that I have here of this kelp forest is one great example of one of the products that Oceanwise is promoting, which is biopolymers. Biopolymers are derived of kelp. They turn into plastic equivalents for a certain part of their life cycle, and they eventually biodegrade again. And if they were to return to the oceans, they will degrade as they do when they are kelp. I also would like to touch briefly on Oliver's comment on restoration, and thank you for including that in particular in your presentation. Restoration is really about rebuilding life. We have to do it, and we have seen rewilding efforts in Europe and other places, also in North America. Rebuilding marine life has to be also one of our commitments, and rebuilding and restoring is part of what I call the ocean positive approach to our interactions with the oceans. And an ocean positive approach is one that recognizes that do no harm is just not good enough. And in any conversation about sustainable use of or blue economy, as in sustainable use of ocean resources, we seem to be ignoring that do no harm is just not good enough. The baseline that we're looking at is an ocean that is in dire straits. And therefore, anything we do with and from the oceans has to add to ocean health. That is not just sustainable use. It has to be rebuilding, it has to be restoring, it has to be regenerating. So thanks again for including that piece in your manifesto. Then I heard you mention as well, Oliver, greener infrastructure, and that is of course true. But I'm also thinking in my head about natural infrastructure, these nature-based solutions that we can use to mitigate climate impacts. For example, a healthy kelp forest in front of a vulnerable coast is mitigating the impact of wave action during extreme weather events. And weather events are just becoming more severe and more frequent because of climate change. So natural infrastructure is gaining in value as we look at them as ways to keep our coasts better protected. And then Taylor, just briefly on your comment on actions to do, and I really love the list that you presented. I also think of dietary changes that we can introduce, and it's up to everybody. It's about mindful sourcing and mindful eating. And mindful sourcing is, for example, if you're pescatarian, I am a pescatarian, I look for the Oceanwise label in the shelves, and that tells me that anything I eat that comes from the oceans is not harming the oceans. If anything, it may also include fishermen and aquaculturalists that are into improving the health of the oceans. So look for mindful sourcing, and then the eating. Definitely reduce your red meat consumption there, because that is very heavy on the carbon footprint. I use margarine instead of butter. Butter has more than 4-fold carbon footprint than margarine, and that's a relatively easy choice. And then when it comes down to the issue about livestock and methane, which is why red meat has this incredible footprint, there seemed to be good news on the horizon, because if you add seaweed to your livestock feed, you may be able to reduce the methane production, which is the burps of the livestock, by maybe up to 90-95% if you use the right species. That's incredible. Are we perhaps looking at a climate-friendly beef down the road if we rely on these nature-based solutions that marine ecosystems offer to us? And then your point about initiate, don't wait, act now, couldn't agree more. Perhaps in closing, I would just like to say I'm very impressed by youth voices coming from Alberta. Alberta is a landlocked piece of land, of course, that still recognizes the role of the oceans. And you know that every second breath we take comes from the oceans, and oceans are really the climate buffer for humanity. So they are the 99% of the living space of the planet, and you have included those considerations in your manifesto. So great call. A quick question, in case there is time for that. Are there other youth manifestos that you have looked at as you were preparing yours? And I heard you speak about dialogues and the chat with Peru. How is that bilateral cross-fertilization of manifestos going on, and how did that inform your manifesto?
I think, not to put you on the spot, but Ocean, I think maybe you could talk a little bit about the development of the global manifesto and a little bit about kind of what went down with those bilateral pairings.
Sure. Well, for one thing, I don't believe that there are other countries who do use manifestos. Not that I am aware of, it is completely possible, but we don't look at other countries' manifestos if there are any. Really, we just base it off of certain documents like the UN documents and consider what we believe would be the right course of action. So for example, the Global Youth Manifesto, I had the pleasure of being able to participate in the writing of it. It was over a span of about 3 days with about 100 participants from all over the world. So I was discussing with students from Japan, Costa Rica, Brazil, and figuring out how we could put all of our ideas onto this paper and make it cohesive, so that it really encompasses everyone's experiences and situations. And so it was a lot to do, and we were well guided. One thing that Decarbonize, Decolonize does is it gives us a voice, and they don't tell us what to say, but they give us tools to know how to say it properly, and how to express ourselves properly and in a respectful manner, let's say a manner that will be able to be heard from people from all sorts of areas. So it was really important for us to be, sometimes you can be a little less diplomatic, but it's really important to keep in mind that everyone's trying, everyone has to work together. And sometimes it can be difficult working with someone who has completely different worldviews than you do concerning religion or sexuality, now that it's Pride Month as well. So it just has to come to realizing that we're all human. We've all lived differently. And just because they think differently than you doesn't mean they're a bad person. They just have ideas coming from a different place, which can be really useful as well. And so in Peru, unfortunately, I had missed a few meetings because I was at COP for some of the meetings. But it was really interesting because at first, we didn't talk about the climate. We talked about our cultures. We talked about like certain festivities, important dates, food, really, and like the environment, like what do our countries have to offer? And based off of that, we were able to kind of dissect what kind of issues were faced by each country and what solution would fit them better. Because in Canada, it's much more colder here for a lot longer than in Peru. Well, mind you, Peru, it's quite elevated as well. But they're very different countries. And so for them, we would discuss about solutions, and they'd be like, oh, well, that wouldn't work here because of this. So for them, sometimes they would have like less funding available. So they would focus more on awareness in their schools, making posters, teaching kids about composting, recycling, and garbage.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ocean. I do think, yes, talking onto those, the challenges and the benefits of writing a manifesto with youth around the world, it can definitely be a challenge, and there are so many different perspectives. But one of the big takeaways that a lot of Waves of Change youth told me was that meeting with other countries, they were kind of shocked at how similar their climate challenges were. Like our Peru partners had similar pollution issues that we had and similar ocean pollution issues that we had. So I think that was a really big takeaway. And as well too, I know Ocean mentioned we don't specifically look at manifestos from around the world, but one of the big things that's really great about this program is now we are one of the only countries that actually creates a youth manifesto to get that perspective of under 18 youth, because again, they're the ones that inherit the climate from us. So it's amazing that we're actually able to have this program to give them this platform to share those ideas, because really in most other countries, you don't get that perspective, which I think is, well, I mean, I think we can all agree is absolutely amazing to have. So thank you very much, Ocean, for that wonderful answer. And thank you, Carlos, for sharing those ideas of the ocean. I'm really now interested to see if Oliver next year starts to move his studies into using kelp to help with those ocean surges. Now I'm like wondering what's going to happen there. It's a very good connection. Okay, sorry, I don't need to be taking up time. We've got still two more that I would love to hear ideas from. So I'm going to pass it over next to Kathy Warbeck with Green Learning to share her ideas on the paper.
Great, thanks. So yes, congratulations to all the work. I know what goes into creating a paper like this. Pulling all those ideas together and figuring out how to organize those ideas is a big challenge. And I just think it was done very well. It's a very readable document. I appreciate that it was only 10 pages and not 50. So made it easy to read and understand. So really appreciated that. And the only thing I would say with kind of, trying to figure out how to organize those pieces is sometimes some of the pieces, it's like it could fit in all categories and not just be in one category, like the, kind of the plastics piece and reducing that. It could be in preventing pollution and the greening curriculum. It could be across all of the topics. So I'm sure that's a big challenge, is trying to figure out how to organize and figure out where they all fit. But I would say that it was great to see and that you would use the E3C paper. It wasn't just a manifesto about climate change. It was that future thinking. It was bringing in those ideas that have kind of moved along. So I really appreciated seeing some of those pieces in there. And it wasn't just about, kind of the basics of climate change and just reducing greenhouse gases. So it had really hopefully advanced your thinking too in where things are going for the future. And for Green Learning, we are a national registered charity, and our whole program is about education. So I think a lot of the things that were asked for in that document are things that we're trying to do and trying to help students and teachers in schools be able to learn about these topics and take action. So we have programs starting with re-energy and looking about renewable energy and building models and just understanding that piece. We're also looking at how do we transform automotive classes in learning about electric vehicles and looking at the future of careers for electric vehicles. And the plastic piece, I'll really reiterate that idea of really thinking about the circular economy. How do we if plastics come into play, how do we keep them continually being reused and not ending up in landfills or in our oceans? We're looking at, that extreme weather and how do we help our schools and communities prepare for things like floods and heat waves and drought. So we have a program that's called Flood Ed. helping school students become energy managers in their school. How do you use energy in school? How do we manage it? How do we conserve it? How do we make sure we're using it efficiently? And then through Waves of Change, we're creating a program called the Ripple Effect, which is really looking about taking climate action for protecting our oceans. And the students learn about, climate action for ocean protection, especially in our coastal communities, looking at ocean policies. And we're also bringing a program that we had years ago that needs to be revamped with new technology called e-cards. And that's where we really want to bring youth voice into this as well. And through this, the students can create their own, they do their learning, and then they create e-cards that they can share with their peers, decision makers, and others to help, again, that education and inspire. And all of our programs are really about that initiate to take action, to truly empower students to take action in their schools. So hopefully we're doing some things that are helping deliver on that manifesto in our organization. And I've heard the 2020s described as the decade of disruption. It's taken us about 20 years to really see things starting to move forward, especially in the energy transition. And I think that things are really starting to move quickly. So I'm not sure, there's great things that you're doing at your schools. Lacombe, I know that school very well, and the goats on a roof and the solar and the new garden that they're doing, and their beekeeping, and they're being kind of very entrepreneurial as well. So just being able to showcase those examples as well as you're talking about the manifesto, I think is inspiring then for others to say, what can we do? So really continue to showcase any of those examples. And I would just, continue to be courageous in bringing your ideas forward into actions in your schools and communities, and continue to connect with other youth-led initiatives. I know, Taylor, you're part of the Alberta Youth Leaders for Environmental Education. There's the Climate Education Reform BC, all the work that CGE and TIG does as well, and Oceanwise. So just keep making sure you're bringing your voice forward. I find if I get up and talk to decision makers, they don't listen to me as much as they do to youth. So be courageous, bring your voice forward as many places as you can. So that's hi. Thank you in Cree.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That's very inspiring. I agree. I think one of the most amazing parts of my job is getting to see youth get to have that opportunity to share their ideas. So it's wonderful. And I do think, especially having a partner like Green Learning, the students had such a focus in their paper on adding that education element and educating the public and sharing those resources. So I think a partner like Green Learning is wonderful because you guys do have such a focus on all of those main points that we touched on the paper. So it's wonderful to have you here. And thank you again very much for sharing. Now I'd like to call on our final guest, Lanielle Bateman with ECCC.
All right, thanks everyone. Adding my appreciation for the presentations. The nice thing, or maybe the worst thing of going last, is I'd like to agree with everything that everyone said ahead of me. But big thanks, Ocean and Oliver and Taylor, for the presentation that you gave, because I thought it was just terrific. And it sounds like this initiative has just really been quite inspiring, from the international aspects to the opportunity to develop actions and a vision for Canada. I'm just tremendously impressed by your work, and kind of picking up on some of the points that Kathy was raising. I do hope and encourage you to continue to pursue environmental advocacy and learning. And I think about where I was when I was at your stage in pursuing education and an environmental background, and then having 20 years or so now in Environment and Climate Change Canada, and just such a rewarding career. I wasn't sure how government was going to be, but I found it tremendously inspiring, and I've had a lot of great opportunities. And so I'm looking at you and hearing you and hearing all your voices. And I think it would just be great if all of you later had your careers at Environment and Climate Change Canada, whether that's as scientists or policy analysts or whatever communications ways that there are that you could be involved. So I guess that wasn't something I was planning to say in my remarks, but as I was listening to you, I was like, I want to hire all of you, or I hope you all join Environment Canada later. So just my appreciation for that. Another couple points I would say is I really liked the framing, both just how you went about the process and hearing about the solutions that were proposed and the concrete recommendations. And I like the future framing as well. The framing around decarbonize and decolonize going together, I think, is really important as well, because it's been a bit of a Western worldview that has got us into the trouble that we're in right now. And so taking a look at those worldviews and systems that we're operating in and questioning them and challenging them and seeing if they lead us to the future that we think of, or if there are, social justice and environmental change objectives that we have that really all fit together, that some of all these objectives go together. And so I would say in the area that I work in Environment and Climate Change Canada, I'm working on the climate change adaptation side of the climate change equation. And so that's preparing for the climate impact, saying as much as we will be laser focused and continue to be laser focused to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, unfortunately, the climate has changed. And we know that, and it's true. And all of you described changes in the environment and areas that you're in. I don't think anyone right now needs to be reminded of the changes that we saw in BC, but Alberta has had a number of some of the most costly disasters that have taken place have been in Alberta as well. And Oliver, you mentioned about the coastal flooding in particular, and that's the kind of thing that we're working in the area that I work on to address and adjust and adapt to that future climate. So I really liked how your recommendations, in addition to being inspiring, Taylor, as you outlined kind of the future aspects, the components, Oliver, that you outlined about the actual recommendations and how they can fit together. So for things like increasing and promoting diverse conversations, the more different voices that we hear, the more solutions that come to the table. And it's terrific to hear youth voices and to hear the ideas that you have and the energy and the passion, and then it can connect to the other things. And so things like sustainable infrastructure and green infrastructure, those solutions, I think as Carlos was mentioning, they can be some of the solutions that are most durable and nature friendly, and they can help combat climate change at the same time. So when we're finding these solutions that accomplish all of our public policy goals, and we say, those are the ones that we need to go for, because that's going to get us in the direction that we need to go in. And then same thing with protecting vulnerable populations due to extreme weather. That's an area that we're working really hard on to develop a national strategy, a national adaptation strategy that looks at addressing climate change risks and says climate change, unfortunately, it's here and we're facing it. And so we really need to be prepared and look at ways to be involved. And the way that we have been doing that process has been involving a diverse range of voices. We've been deliberate about including youth voices as much as we can. We've been including Indigenous voices all throughout our process, and looking at nature as a key component of our work, and then looking at ways that we can also have a social justice and equity lens on our work, because climate change isn't affecting us all equally. It's really important to consider what it means for vulnerable populations where there may be reasons where people don't have the resources to be able to pack up and go when a disaster strikes, or the resources to change their community in the same way. So just really appreciated the positive framing and the way the solutions, at least I could see in my area, are really interconnected. And I would just, I guess, close my remarks just by saying I really do encourage you to continue to put your voices forward on the National Adaptation Strategy. We have an engagement process right now. So there's an online platform. It's called Let's Talk Adaptation. Let's Talk Adaptation, and that's in English and it's in French. And then you can go on there. We're going to have a set of webinars, and there's ideas that you can generate your ideas. Then that's an example of a public engagement and consultation process right now where you have a chance to make your voice heard. And so I would just encourage you, whether that's being part of the COP delegation or participating in a public policy or an initiative like this, just encourage you to keep making your voices heard, because the climate future is yours. And so your voices are among the most important for us to be listening to. So I've just been so pleased to be part of this today. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It is awesome to hear from the organization who these youth base their paper off of. So thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to their response to your department's paper. We only have a couple of minutes left, but I did want to do one last quick, if any of our youth or any of our guests have any last questions before we do our final wrap-ups and let everybody go at the end of the hour here. Do any of my youth have any questions? I know there was so many big ideas from all of these guests that joined us today, but any any other things that we'd like to cover? I think Senator Coyle, do you have something you'd like to say? Yeah.
Just one final thing. We've focused a lot on the federal government and that level, and there's been mention of civil society. But I think it's really important to look at the municipal level as well as the provincial level. And I think that you all know that already, but I just didn't want that to be left unsaid, that all levels of government are important, and increasingly the provincial and the territorial, as well as the Indigenous governments and the municipal level. So I would just add that to the mix as something very important.
Totally, I couldn't agree more. And I do think on that note of making immediate action against climate, I do think the best way to do that is to start where you are, right? We all know that federal takes a little bit longer than working in our communities. So for sure, getting youth involved in their communities is one of the biggest. I know Terry had a couple final thoughts that he would like to share. Well, Ocean, I'll let you go ahead and do your question first, and then Terry will pass it over to you when she's done.
So I can go?
Yeah.
It's less of a question and more of a comment, because I really appreciate everyone for being here. This is, like, for me, it's always been an incredible opportunity and experience to be able to work with Decarbonize, Decolonize, and all these amazing people. But I really want to remind you that it's really important within your organizations to keep in mind the youth perspective, because as for today, like, I appreciate your participation, but it's going to be really, really important to implement our youth views. And it might be difficult, but understand that you have a lot of youth in Canada to talk to, right? It's not just the three of us. And so I would like to ask you to really do your best to represent us as well, and not to forget about us when you're fighting for the change that you want to see in the world. And that while we realize that you can help us, realize that we can also help you. We might be younger, but that doesn't mean we're not as powerful. So thank you very much.
Thank you for those final words, Ocean. And just to do our final wrap up, I'll pass it over to Terry.
So I just want to comment again, Ocean, how it's so very true that is from the work that we've been doing this now over a decade plus, the power of the youth to come along beside and say, provide for us that space. So many times there are places for youth over 18, but for young people in that most developmental time in their lives to ensure that there are channels for listening, that there are channels for engagement is so important as they continue. If I can just speak really quickly, Carlos, your feedback about really tangible components of where youth can take these more general recommendations, very much as we look forward to the next wave of this project. I think so many of those examples you gave are ones that we can take this into the second year and say, let's talk about some tangible actions we can take around these broader scopes. And I think your examples you gave are perfect, are a shining light for next year's project as we move waves of change forward. Laniel, the importance of the Indigenous voice, this is decarbonize, decolonize. And as we look towards food sustainability, Carlos spoke to that. And as we look to the crisis that particularly our friends in Africa are facing, and we look this year at Indigenous species, be they in the water or on the land, as the planet comes together to share those. And I know, Senator Coyle, you have such a strong leadership in and with and beside and in support of our Indigenous communities. And I think your recommendations, especially around mental health, we know that when we look at the global challenges, these are ones, this is very slow moving. The change is intense and it's slow moving. But if we can, as you say, link this to municipal action, we're going to be able to provide young people with the opportunities to make that change where they can feel it, where they feel the power that they do have for immediate change. And working with those municipal governments, as well as our federal governments and global governments, are so important. And lastly, Kathy, the work that you are and Green Learning are doing in classrooms on a practical, equipping, everyday level. We have teachers from coast to coast to coast who want to make change, and to have partners like Green Learning who are saying, great, here's a resource. Oceanwise doing the same, taking a global as the founding partner to decarbonize, decolonize, and is such an important part of oceans of waves of change. Friends, thank you so much for these recommendations. As you can see, both this manifesto, the Global Manifesto, was in the hands of incredibly competent, well-spoken, and passionate young people. And as Canada provides that leadership within our own country, but as we look around the rest of the world, Canada has amazing young people who are showing that leadership across this planet as well. Rebecca, back to you.
Awesome. I mean, I don't have anything I need to wrap up because Terry, you have tied everything up so beautifully at the end here. I just wanted to say thank you to all the organizations that have made this possible and made it possible for our youth. I'd like to thank our youth one more time for that amazing presentation. Unfortunately, they're in class, so we've already lost Oliver, but thank you very much to Ocean and Taylor and Oliver for that presentation. And thank you to our wonderful guests for not only listening to our youth and giving them this platform, but sharing all of those amazing ideas with them. We all very much appreciate it. And I can't thank you guys enough for making this possible. I do have one quick ask before I let you guys go. Our friends at the Senate would love to take a group photo of everyone. So if you're comfortable allowing them to do a quick group photo, Jeremy, you can go ahead and take a quick picture of us before I let everybody go.
You might need to stop. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rebecca. So screenshot photos are a little bit tricky because I tried to get a few while folks were speaking, but it's hard to get everyone's eyes open at the same time. So I'll do a quick countdown from 5 and we'll go from there. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And that looks awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, amazing. So I will share with you guys all the link to watch this video if you'd like to share it with anybody else in your organization or whomever you'd like to spread the word to. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us.